We are going to graph sine and cosine today. Hopefully you have your orange sheet in front of you. You can take notes on this or in your notebook. You're also going to need your calculator. We're going to be using our calculator to help us find some values of sine and cosine. But first we need to talk about a little vocabulary. First one is a periodic function. And a periodic function is where if you translate the graph horizontally, so right to left, it'll look identical to the original graph. So basically, the graph repeats itself at regular intervals. And the other one is period. How far along the x-axis between the beginning of one cycle and the beginning of the next cycle. So basically, once it repeats itself, that's one cycle. So if you guys need a little bit more time to write this down, hit pause. And then when you hit play again, we'll look at a couple graphs. So I have two graphs down here, and I want to know, are they periodic? So if we look at graph 1, we notice that it kind of starts here at -2, goes up, goes down, and then here we are again at 0, back kind of where we started. And then it happens again. It goes up, goes down, and back to where it started. So is this function periodic? Yes, it is periodic. Okay, it returns to where it started in a periodic fashion. And what is one period? Basically, how long does it take to get from the start to the end? So if we start here at 0, it goes down, and we're back at 0, ready to go up again after 2 units. So the period here would be 2. If we look at this other graph, is it periodic? Kind of curves, then turns to a rectangle, rectangle again, then a curve. I probably couldn't predict what it was going to do next. This one is not periodic, okay? This is not a periodic function, so we don't know what one period is. So a periodic function just repeats itself over and over and over again. Okay. Again, if you need a few more seconds, hit pause, and then we're going to talk about amplitude. Okay. Amplitude is 1/2 the vertical distance between the maximum and the minimum y values on our sine or cosine graph. Or I like to think of it as the distance from the middle to the top or the middle to the bottom. And amplitude is always positive. So even if it starts going down first and you think the amplitude is a negative number, you change it to positive. Amplitude is always positive. So make sure that if you are asked for amplitude, you give a positive number here. So this is the graph we looked at last time. It's a periodic function. The period is 2. The midpoint here is our x-axis. This is the one that kind of goes up, hits the middle, goes back down, hits the middle. Up, hits the middle, down, hits the middle, and starts again. So how tall does it go from the middle back to the middle? It goes up to 4 and down to 4. From 0 to 4, this is the amplitude. Okay, and how much is it? The amplitude equals 4. Okay, if you want to think of it like this, half the vertical distance between the max and the min, the vertical distance here is, sorry, went a little too far. The vertical distance is 8. Half of 8 gives us 4. So the amplitude here is 4. If you need a couple minutes, hit pause. And now we're going to start working on our sine and cosine graphs. So turn your orange sheet to the side that says, given the function y equals sine of x, and then it asks you to fill in the table below using your unit circle, or you guys can use your graphing calculator. So it looks like I missed one here. The first thing on your worksheet should say, when x is 0 degrees, what's sine of 0? So sine of 0 is 0. Okay, so that should be the first one that you fill in. If you have your calculator out, you're going to type in sine 30 and hit enter. And we know from our unit circle, the sine of 30 is 1/2, but we are going to write 0.5. We're going to use our decimals for this one. So next one is sine of 60. When you type this in, we know it's the square root of 3 over 2, but you get 0.866. So you should be typing these values in your calculator. Okay, if you want to hit pause and fill it out, I'm going to keep going. Make sure you are able to generate all these values using your calculator. So at this point, you guys should have filled out your table. It should look a lot like mine. You guys have another revolution that you can fill out from 390 to 720. If you have time, you should continue on and do that. But I'm going to start graphing these. So my x-axis here is my degrees, and my y-axis is equal to sine of x. So when x is 0, y is also 0. So you should plot that first point there as 0, 0. Okay, when x is 30, and your 30 is marked clearly with a line, mine is not, so hopefully mine will line up. 30, and then 1/2, so it should be kind of right here on 0.5. Then you move over to 60, and you should be at almost 0.9, so I'm going to put that up here. And then at 90 degrees, you should be all the way to the top at 1. And then this hill kind of starts going down. So at 120, which again yours is labeled with a line, mine isn't, 0.866, which is just about 0.9. At 150, you're back at 1/2. And then 180, you should be back at 0. And then this one starts to go negative. So 210, you should be at negative 0.5. Let's see if I can find that here. 240 is negative 0.9. 270, my scale is a little off, negative 1. 300 should be back at negative 0.9. 330, negative 1/2, and 360 should be back at 0, even though I wrote 1 up here. 0. Okay. So at this point, I want you guys to start drawing in the sine curve. And I mean that I'm missing most of my points here. But this should look more like a wave. So I like to say more like a roller coaster and less like mountains. Okay, you should not have like spikes here. This should be a nice, easy sine curve. So no mountain peaks. Okay, yours should not look like this. Okay, more roller coastery. So if you filled out the rest of your graph or your table, you should be able to graph another period worth of sine. At this point, we have one full cycle graphed. Okay? And one full cycle, we know, is called a period. Okay. So I have now asked you, question 2, circle the points on the graph that you think are critical to plot if you want to sketch this graph in the future. So the points I think are critical are 0, 0, where does it start? The top of my mountain here at 90 degrees, back to 0, the bottom of my hill at 270, and back to 0 again at 360. So I have circled 5 points that I think are critical. 0, 90, 180, 270, and 360. And those are kind of the easy ones on our unit circle, if you remember that, where sine is 0, 1, 0, negative 1, and 0. So I'm going to use these 5 points to make a parent function table. So we're back to graphing and using parent functions. So x and y, I just said I was going to use those major points on my unit circle. So 90 and then 180, 270, and 360. And I will always provide you guys with the parent table. So we know from our table up top, when x is 0, y is 0. Then it goes up to 1, back to 0, down to -1, and then back to 0 again. You will notice one full cycle ends up being right where our table ends. Okay, so on your homework today, you can use your table to determine what one period is. And for this one, it's 360 degrees. So that's this first question. What's the period? 360 degrees. That is not on your homework sheet, but you should write it down. What is the amplitude? Again, look at your table. From the middle, which is 0, how high do we go? Up to 1 or down to 1? Our amplitude is 1. Okay, from the middle to the top or from the middle to the bottom. The domain. Domain is all the x values you can put in. We can put in any degree that we think of. We can move along the x-axis as much as we'd like. So the domain here is all real numbers. Okay, and then range. Range is a tricky one, but you can go back and look at your y column here. Remember, domain is the x's, range is the y's. This never gets bigger than +1, and it never gets smaller than -1. So our range, we could say our y's go between +1 and -1. And this is how we would write this. So the range for the sine function is between -1 and +1. At this point, I want you guys to hit pause and fill out your cosine graph. It's on the other side of your worksheet. And make the parent table. The last thing we're going to talk about is transformations. And we have talked about amplitude and period now. And we are going to graph y equals 3 sine 2x. So I gave you the parent table. Again, guys, I'm always going to give you the parent table. And then I'm going to give you those rules again. Remember, our rules was whatever happens inside the function, and that's going to be anything that happens after the sine or cosine. So 2x happens inside our function. We're going to do the opposite of that to the x's. So the opposite of times 2 would be to divide by 2. So I'm going to have 1/2 x here. And whatever happens outside, that's 3 here, we're going to do that to the y's. So 3y. So my rule, if you were writing the rule for this one, would be 1/2 x and then 3y. And you should be able to now transform your table just like we did before. If we transform the x's, half of 0 is still 0. Half of 90 is 45. Half of 180 is 90. Half of 270, I believe, is 135. And half of 360 is 180 degrees. And now we need to transform the y's. So 0 times 3 is 0. 3 times 1 is 3. 0 times 3 is 0. We get -3 and 0. And now we can use these points to plot our graph. So we're going to have 0, 0. We're going to have 4. And then if we change this, you should change your scale here, and I did not do that. And -1, -2, -3. 0, 0, then we're going to have 45 degrees all the way up to 3. 90 degrees, we're back at 0. 135 degrees, we're down to -3. And 180, we're back at 0. And you should be able to connect these points. And again, more roller coaster, less mountains. Okay, and get your sine curve graphed. So if we go back here now and look at our table, our period is 180 degrees. Okay, our period got smaller based on what happened to our x's. So our original function, it took 360 to get one full cycle. This time it took us 180 degrees. And our amplitude, we can look at our y's. It goes from 0 to 3 or 0 to negative 3. Our amplitude is 3. So on your homework today, I'm going to ask you to transform functions. You're going to use the rule. You can use your calculator to help you if you need to, and then you need to be able to give the period and the amplitude. So your homework today, it's out of the book. Remember, you can get your book online. The password and login are on my board in D225. But you guys have page 759, 2 through 5, 14 through 17, and 40 through 42. And the notes on the homework are up online.